Welcome to a very special Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable. We're doing this 4-part series on Project 2025. It's July 9th, 2024, and this is part 1. You may not yet know of Project 2025, but you will certainly come to understand its effect on your life starting January 20th, 2025, Inauguration Day. Project 2025 is a radically conservative 920-page manifesto on what Donald Trump, GOP, and evangelicals plan to do on day one of a new administration. The plan, largely written by the radically conservative Heritage Foundation, is anti-LGBTQ, anti-students and youth, anti-schools, will divide families, and draw a line in the sand for Christian nationalism and against diversity, equity, and inclusion, and much more. Our 4-part series will explore Project 2025. This is Safe Schools in the Rainbow Roundtable. Here's the Project 2025 mission statement. Quote, "It is not enough for conservatives to win elections. If we are going to rescue the country from the grip of the radical left, we need both a governing agenda and the right people in place, ready to carry this agenda out on day one of the next conservative administration. This is the goal of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. The project will build on 4 pillars that will collectively pave the way for an effective conservative administration." End quote. This is a special Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable exploring and understanding Project 2025 and its likely effects on LGBTQ+ students and youth. This special series is made possible with the incredible support of Richard Quadracci and the Quadracci Family Foundation. The Quadracci family has been instrumental in their support of the LGBTQ community. Thank you for your support of the LGBTQ students and youth from AHF and the incredible Florida AIDS Walk that in 2024 raised more than $3.4 million for vital LGBTQ nonprofits, including Safe Schools. Thank you for your support from Children's Trust of Miami and their recognition that LGBTQ students and youth are vital to the diversity of our schools and our community. Thank you from your support from Hotspots Magazine, Happening Out Television Network. This nonprofit media company developed this broadcast and platform powered by their mission pillar to support LGBTQ youth and students. To help us navigate this 4-part series on Project 2025, let's introduce our very diverse panel. First, let's welcome Rebecca Thompson, candidate for Broward County's public schools. Let's welcome social media influencer Tiffany Williams. She is the host of Safe Schools, Tiffany's Explains It All. Let's welcome special education and 7th grade civics teacher, Brian Bender. Let's welcome the gay guru, Al Ferguson, a longtime participant with RuPaul's Drag Race. He is the creator of television programs including It's Happening Out, The Faye What Show, and the world's only LGBTQ+ daily evening news show, Queer News Tonight. Let's welcome Harold Marrero. He is a pastor and the chief operating officer for Safe Schools. Now, let's dive right into understanding Project 25. This is part 1 as we look at the history of creating manifestos like Project 25 and why they develop in moments of time like we are witnessing in Florida and America. As we dive into today's theme, it's essential to understand the historical context of past legislative efforts and societal shifts that have shaped the current landscape for LGBTQ+ rights and protections. The fight for LGBTQ+ rights in the United States has been long and arduous. Starting in the mid-20th century, the LGBTQ+ community began to organize and advocate for their rights, leading to significant legal and social changes over the decades. The 1960s and the 1970s were pivotal decades. The Stonewall riots of 1969 are often cited as the catalyst for the modern queer rights movement. Activists began to challenge laws that criminalized homosexual behavior and sought to gain visibility and acceptance. In 1973, The American Psychiatric Association declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder, a significant step towards destigmatization. The 1980s and 1990s saw incremental progress. Cities and states began to pass anti-discrimination ordinances, protecting queer individuals in employment and housing. However, the community faced setbacks, such as the HIV/AIDS crisis, which disproportionately affected gay men and was initially met with neglect and stigma. The 1996 Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, prohibited federal recognition of same-sex marriages, reflecting the ongoing legal and cultural battles. The 2000s marked significant victories. In 2003, the Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence v. Texas invalidated sodomy laws across the country, affirming the privacy rights of queer individuals. In 2015, the landmark Supreme Court case Obergefell v. Hodges legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, a monumental step towards equality. Despite these advancements, the queer community continues to face significant challenges. Policies like Florida's Don't Say Gay law and parental rights laws highlight ongoing efforts to roll back protections and limit discussions on queer identities. The Project 2025 document proposes several policies that could further erode the rights of queer Americans. These include rescinding protections against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, and interpreting sex and discrimination laws based on, quote, biological binary, which would invalidate the experiences and identities of transgender individuals. The prioritization of abstinence-only sexual education and the elimination of comprehensive sex education programs mirror Florida's restrictive educational policies. These measures deny LGBTQ+ youth the information they need to understand their identities and protect their health. The promotion of parental rights to exclude queer topics from education and healthcare decisions further marginalizes queer youth, placing them in potentially hostile environments. The document's definition of family prioritizes a traditional nuclear family model, excluding same-sex couples. This could deny LGBTQ+ parents the same rights and recognitions afforded to heterosexual parents, affecting everything from adoption rights to parental recognition in schools and medical facilities. The call for robust protections for religious employers allows for discrimination against queer individuals and families based on religious grounds. This could lead to denial of services in healthcare, education, and other public services, disproportionately affecting queer parents who rely on these services. So a question for the panelists. Now that we've explored the historical context, let's turn to our panelists. Let's start with this. How have past legislative efforts shaped the current landscape for queer rights, and what lessons can we draw from these historical battles?
You know, I was thinking about this as you were talking about it. And the first statement that I want to say is like, oh, you know, this is not who we are. This is not America. Like, I don't recognize America right now. But the truth is that this kind of has always been who we are, to be honest. When you look at the history of the queer community, and when it comes to the legislation and the way government has interfered with our lives since the beginning, this has always been our experience. Only recently have we had, you know, successes because we came together as a community and we utilized the law to really put a mirror up to the government and say, you know, you really are invading into our lives, and this is not, you're not treating us equal, and we have equal protection under the law according to the Constitution. However, there's always this duality that I feel is part of our Americanism, where we think and we want to be better than what we are, and we teach our kids that we are better than what we are, and we've done a great job at developing this ethos. But in reality, what we get is what we see in Project 25 and what we have had in the historical perspective of how we have been treated, particularly the queer community has been treated across the decades. So it's scary. It's scary, and I think that past legislation can only be a mirror for us to see what the future can look like. And for me, I always go back to the AIDS crisis, the conservative governments during the AIDS crisis did nothing to protect us. In fact, they kind of wanted us to suffer through what we're going through in many ways. And Christian nationalism was very clear that this is God's punishment for our quote unquote immoral lifestyle. So, I mean, this is what we're seeing now, being proposed in Project 2025.
It's interesting to me that in the exploration of this first segment of the history is to point out, just as you said, this is not unique. We're living through our example of majority Americans marginalizing a minority group, and in various different ways. Christian nationalism is a majority group in America that is now, with Project 2025, going to marginalize a whole segment of American society that is different than Christian nationalism. But we've seen this over and over before. Just a quick checkoff of people that are alive today that have watched what Project 2025 is going to implement. In the 1940s, we watched this with Japanese internment and marginalizing the minority of whatever we thought was wrong with Japanese Americans, of which we came back and said, wow, did we make terrible decisions and actually compensated them for that. In the 1950s, we had the communist scare, McCarthyism, and the Lavender Scare against LGBT community. In the 1960s, we saw civil rights. And while there was an advancement of laws in civil rights, there was actually a gigantic backlash of civil rights in so many ways that we still experience today, but especially in the 1960s and the 1970s. In the 1970s and the 1980s, AIDS came along and characterized marginalizing the gay community as the plague is justified, as you've said, from God. And as a result, it gave Christian nationalism and politicians the ability to marginalize the LGBTQ community. And then in the 1990s, really until Obergefell was decided in 2015, gay marriage and gay relationships were a battleground to marginalize the gay community in terms of their relationships. So in terms of the history of what we're watching in Project 2025, we've seen this over and over and over again, starting as example in the 1940s. And now it's just another example of something that we're all living through. Project 2025 is McCarthyism right before our very eyes to marginalize whole segments of American communities to recreate America in the viewpoint of those that are in the majority.
Yeah. McCarthyism with a new wig, new makeup.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback on the point, this is the most comprehensive that we have seen in generations in terms of the policy that these people want to implement. These people have a very hateful agenda. I don't know that they necessarily see it that way because of the way that they are socialized in their churches and in their communities. But definitely people that are looking at it from the outside, especially us as marginalized communities, we really see it for what it is. It's a way of silencing us. It's a way of squashing dissent. It's a way of really just getting us indoctrinated in whether we like it or not into their way of being. And I think that that's deeply un-American.
Yes.
And you said that there has always been this strain of progress and then a regression, progress and a regression. And I don't know that there is going to be, after this regression, if this, we have basically lost. So I don't know that there is going to be a progression for many generations after this gets implemented, if in fact we do have Donald Trump for another 4 years.
Well, in terms of talking about history of trying to understand how Project 2025 could be developed, that is, for me, the most scary observation that we likely can make today. Because Joe McCarthy in the 1950s had a limited shelf life. His lie wore out. And as a result, that forces him out of office, etc. The AIDS conflict develops ACT UP and the protests that took place in America for AIDS, and that really ended the tremendous marginalization that took place over the AIDS crisis. This is very different because we started to watch, largely, I think, of a black president coming to power in 2008. And over the last 15 years, it was just the first of the building blocks that lead to Project 2025. The white Christian nationalists decide, oh no, this is not the America that we grew up with in the 1950s and 60s, and we're going to take it back. And because they so significantly hold to that truth, we're watching a threat that is far greater than what we saw in communism or the Lavender Scare or Japanese internment or even civil rights, in that they are going to win at all cost. They are going to say whatever they need to say to justify, to get the pieces in place to get it, including appointing 3 Supreme Court justices that are going to redefine constitutional issues to get what they want. And this likely could affect us, as you said, for generations. And that's what's new over Project 2025.
I think this could be the death knell of any progress that could be made for, I don't want to say forever because I don't have a crystal ball, but I do want to say for at least the next 50 years, until there's some seismic shift in the way that people perceive LGBTQ issues in our country. And if these people get a foothold, which obviously they are through this Project 2025, we're going to be at their mercy. And I think that it's very important that we educate the folks out there to know what is really at stake in this election.
And I think the scary part is how subtle they've been able to do it, because it's not like former President Trump where he said something outrageous and everyone kind of knows that that's outrageous. They started by saying, we're protecting kids.
Right.
Because who doesn't want to protect kids? And so then they slowly creep up and pass these laws all with the guise of we're protecting kids. It's not anti-anybody. We got to keep our kids safe. And what parent isn't going to be galvanized by wanting to protect their kids? So I think that's scary. But I think we can look back at history and see hope, because we were able to have the civil rights movement. We were able to kind of rise up and strike back, but we need to galvanize the people. And it's not just voting. Taking one day of your life to go vote is civic duty, but we need to be like a responsibility of American, but we need to be like out talking to people, because even now people don't know that abortion's on the ballot in Florida. They don't know about Project 25. I had heard whispers of it before being invited on this, and now I know more. But like, we need to be educating people and putting energy into it, and there's a lot of like apathy. So I think it can pass if we don't energize people to fight against it. But I don't want to say it's hopeless, because then everyone will give up.
And I think, you say there's a lot of apathy, but I will come out and say that I feel like there's, in some pockets of our progressive population, there's a lot of willful ignorance. And that's the scary part. The apathy is, I get it, like you're in your bubble, you don't know. But to be willfully ignorant of things that will impact you, immediately impact you in the next couple of years, that to me is more scary than just apathy. I can forgive apathy. I have a hard time forgiving willful ignorance.
And that is a criticism. That's a really, in my opinion, an amazing observation, because we can criticize a governor, and we can criticize a former president, and we can criticize a whole plethora of criminals that have criminalized the American system. But at the end of the day, we likely should be criticizing ourselves in our LGBT community, because we are actively deciding to disengage. And while we recognize what is going on, we actively decide, but we're not really going to do anything about that. Somebody else will take care of this problem. And we're coming up to no, this has been so insidious that there's no white knight coming for us. If we don't act, who does? And that's why I think your observation is right on point.
Do you all think the LGBTQ community has been resting on their laurels of recently that gave rise to the Project 2025? Or were we advocating too loudly, too boldly, and there was a reactionary effect? Or some both, combination of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think as time has progressed, as someone who is in a younger category of generation, a lot of people from my generation and younger are a lot more progressive. They're more accepting. And I think what Al had mentioned earlier, the older conservatives, like they're starting to see that American dream is leaving. But the thing is, the American dream has been dead for many years. Let us be very honest about that. And I think they're in denial about that. And they see that the younger generation are going to be that radical change once they get to that seat, but they're not going to hold on to that power because they don't want to give it to us because it would be too intense for them. It would be too different for them. They're not used to that. And so how do they fight back is by putting something like Project 2025 into motion. And again, it was subtle. It's been not someone shouting at the rooftops, yeah, we're taking away the rights. And the thing that I, as a young person, have issues when people want to say, oh, well, we want to protect the children. I'm like, you don't care about the children at any point.
Yeah.
So stop saying it's about protecting the children because you don't care. You care about abortion is, a horrible thing. It shouldn't be done. But then there is no child care for that child to come into this world. There's no support. They don't have a roof over their head. Their parents can't support them. So it's like your statement is contradicting to your actions and the things that you're putting into place. In the LGBTQ plus community, I also agree that we have moments of woeful ignorance. And I always make the statement, I'm like, the call's coming from inside the house. Like, you can't be pointing fingers at other people if you can't get your own house in order. And I get it. If some people, I've heard from other people in the community, they're like, well, I'm not part of that letter, so I don't really want to state on that. It's like, well, that's fine. But support somebody, find somebody in the community that is going through that and give them support. And if you are in a space where you have the privilege where people are going to listen to you and you're saying, well, I'm not going to speak. I'm going to let somebody who actually experiences this, has gone through this, I'm going to let them speak their story because you can't take away our experiences and our stories.
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful that you mentioned the letter because I think one of the most strategic thing that has happened recently is that conservatives or people pushing a certain agenda found the one minority in the minority that they can point to that they knew the other letters of our alphabet would be like, oh, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to deal with that. And that has been the trans community. They have demonized trans people to the point that it's abusive, it's bullying. And I hear it all the time from people within our ever expanding alphabet that they're like, oh, but I don't get the trans experience. I don't want to be involved in the trans experience. I don't agree that they should compete with my child. And it's like, none of this is happening. You have fallen for the trap that they set for you, that they set for us, and we have subdivided all because they knew that if they go for that community, for that minority among the minority, I mean, this is the 1% of the 10%. And that has become like, the boogeyman. And I really do feel like there's a lot of misinformation, even from, like you said, the call is coming from inside the house.
I'd like to add to that. I think, just to reiterate your points, I think gay men, white cisgendered gay men in general, myself included, could be guilty of not including our trans brothers and sisters and non-binary siblings into the conversation because we feel, and I'm going to include myself in that just because of the privilege that I have as a cisgendered white male, gay male. I think that it took so long to achieve a certain level of respectability in the society, it's still tenuous. We're still working on it. And Obviously, if this project goes forward, we're going to lose all of that as well. I think that we've basically taken seats away from the table now, and I think it's really the time where we should all be coming together.
Yeah.
We should be recognizing that our trans siblings are being singled out, being marginalized, and it's really time for us to fight back on that and to really dispel these narratives that what is occurring right now is somehow indoctrination, grooming, predatory behavior, telling children that they can have certain pronouns or whatever it is. Language evolves. I'm a teacher, so I'm very interested in the way that language evolves. We're not inventing new words. The words that we're using right now are just words that we're using to acknowledge deep things that are happening in our collective psyche, in our personal psyches, and it's pointing in a certain direction. So if these students, if these children, if these adults, if these elderly people who are just now coming out as transgendered, it's because we have language for it now. So it's not a new phenomena. It is something that has been with us. It has been with us since the beginning of time. I'm sure if you go back to Roman literature, Greek literature, ancient Canaanite literature, you would find people that don't fit the binary.
Yep.
And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think that we really need to embrace that. And I think that especially the white cisgendered male gay community really needs to recognize that we need to make space for everybody. We don't need to worry about being acceptable to populations of people that hate us too. They might not be showing that as vehemently as they're showing it to our trans brothers and sisters, but it's there.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me because while I agree with that observation, I fundamentally disagree with whether we're going to do what you've just asked for. When you say this snuck up on us, and it was done quietly, it was because this is largely a very orchestrated divide and conquer plan.
Yep.
And we fell for it, and it worked. And it starts largely, again, I say in 2008, of the advancement of Barack Obama and what he represented. He was anti-marriage. Then he accepted relationship in LGBTQ community, and then he embraced gay marriage. And the combination of that and being black and what we've watched over the last 15 years is a situation where you and I diverge. We don't, because I agree with you. But where we split is your age. I am a baby boomer, and baby boomers in America, white men largely, cannot accept the observation that you just made. My cohorts of white male Christian, which I am, not nationalism, are in a situation that my divergent cohort is I'm gay. But what we've watched over the last 15 years is a dramatic increase of people who identify as LGBT. For decades and decades, it largely was considered between 3.9 and 7% of our population was LGBT. When you poll today Gen Zers, it's 20%. The phrase fluid is a scary term for my generational ID of baby boomers. And as a result, our response is on trans, no, not me personally, but talking broadly on baby boomers. On the number of people who identify as LGBT and fluid, the answer is no. And this Christian nationalism in America says enough is enough. And we're not going to take it anymore from the old movie network, which probably none of you know. But the issue is we're watching a pushback to say this is not our America, and we're taking it back. And that's what we're watching, and that's what leads to a Project 2025.
But that goes again back to like what Brian said, that gay men, particularly gay white men, gay cisgender white men, have said, we got to this place. Here, look at what we got. And I would say lesbians too. The G and the L got to a certain level of the white picket fence with the dog, the 2 kids, and the house in the suburbs. That's it. And I think that what was targeted, and this is where it really gets really tricky, and this has to be unpacked more, but I'm just gonna say, like, what was targeted is the internal shame, and that was then said, that has been put out there, and a lot of us kind of retreated and said, like, no, like, this is not who we are. Like, these people are not who we are. But it's like this, they've always been who we are, and we forgot that.